Hi, this is Jonathan Landsman, founder of CreateHealthAndWellness.com. Our show today, Cancer, a brand new healing perspective. Our guest, Andreas Moritz, is one of the world's leading experts on integrative medicine. He has practiced and taught Ayurveda, meditation, yoga, nutrition, iridology, shiatsu, and vibrational therapy for over 30 years. He is the author of Cancer is Not a Disease, It's a Survival Mechanism. And we are blessed to have his perspective on cancer a part of this show. Andreas, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Why do you say that cancer is not a disease?
Well, that's a huge question, actually, and that's why I wrote an entire book about it. But the issue is that cancer, like in many other diseases, there are symptoms. There are symptoms of healing that the body is coming up with in order to remedy a situation that is very, very difficult to deal with. For example, if you had a tumor somewhere in the body, then the body is doing that not to kill itself, but in fact to survive, to siphon off and remove and put in a safe place a lot of toxins and waste products, a lot of bacteria that are hanging around in tumors inside the cells and outside the cells. There are fungi, there are viruses. They are only attracted to an area of contamination. When there is any congestion in a part of the body for a long, long time, we're talking about mostly lymphatic congestion, where the lymph drainage that is responsible for removing metabolic waste products such as lactic acid, uric acid, urea, ammonia, and dead cells is impeded. And when that happens, you have backwashing of waste into the softer tissues of organs and systems, which means that the body is suffocating in its own waste. And that is very, very difficult to deal with. So the only way the body can remove some of that or keep it stored away without causing too much harm and actually killing the person outright, which would happen because these poisons and toxins, they could enter the bloodstream and cause septic shock, and the person would just die very quickly. In order to prevent that, the body has to deal with it in a different way, and normal healthy cells can convert into malignant cells. That means malaligned cells that are no longer in alignment with the original design or genetic blueprint. They have to adjust to a different mode of functioning, such as functioning anaerobically without oxygen, in order to deal with the large amount of metabolic waste products. Cancer cells, for example, can metabolize lactic acid. Now, that's a feat that's quite unheard of. And when you look at other healthy cells, they're trying to get rid of lactic acid, and here cancer cells can take up lactic acid and convert that into energy, so they can continue maintaining some sort of functioning in that organ or system. So, altogether, there is not really a reason why the body would try to be suicidal, kill itself, when it uses such methods as siphoning off or removing toxins, waste products, dead cells, and keep them in a safe place where they form a tumor or form a particular growth that is mistaken for a disease. It's actually a mode of survival.
So, right, as you just said, without the cancer tumors being formed, you're basically saying the body would, in theory, would die a lot faster.
Absolutely. So, that's why when you treat cancer with chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery, basically what you're doing is you suppress the real cancer. The real cancer is not the tumor. The real cancer is composed or is comprised of the massive amount of toxins that are trapped in the body because the organs of elimination, such as the liver, the kidneys, and the large intestine, are clogged up. That means the waste that the body naturally tries to get rid of is backing up into the system and has to go somewhere. Oftentimes it goes upward. For example, if people have chronic constipation, they will have a backwashing of waste that brings fecal matter, toxins, gases, drugs that people may have ingested, dead bacteria, live bacteria, virus material, candida, yeast, up into the upper part of the body, passing through via the stomach into the chest area, into the throat. So it can cause chest problems, it can cause throat problems, thyroid problems, tooth decay, nasal congestion, sinus problems, eye problems, hearing problems, and problems in the nervous system, and even hair loss. So when the body is eliminating its own toxins in the wrong direction, so to say, instead of the normal passages that are meant to be used for elimination, then the body has to deal with it in a different way, and we call that different way a disease.
Yeah, it seems like such a simple, commonsensical approach to understanding how our bodies work. What's going on here? Why across this country, at the very least, it seems like most people here, God forbid, they're diagnosed with enough cancer cells that they see that there's a tumor that does exist in somebody's body, that they say they have this horrible disease, and we have to cut it out, and we have to pump you with drugs. Why is it that approach instead of understanding, it's sort of like the picture you've painted is the body is backing up, it's not able to eliminate things properly. Why aren't we looking at it this way?
Well, we are not, because it's not business-like, and it's not supporting an industry that is based upon detecting so-called illnesses and that disempower the human body or the person, the individual. So the person is not really told what causes the cancer. There is hardly any investigation or research into what causes cancer. We know now, and some independent scientists, they are researching what are the risk factors for developing cancer, and so we now know there are vaccinations, wearing bras, which impairs lymph drainage from the breast and suffocates breast cells. We know that early puberty, and there's the breast cancer link between puberty and breast cancer because of the high levels of estrogens which are secreted, and that's often because of what we eat. For example, eating meat which raises estrogens in the body, and chemicals and herbicides, pesticides, they all raise estrogen. So that's a risk factor which has been very well researched. There are products that are not really foods, that are just called foods, like soy or soy milk, which is a waste product when they produce soy oil, and that is put into the human food chain, and that raises estrogen, so that in itself can increase the risk of cancer. We now know that fried food definitely raises the risk of cancer, like French fries and hamburgers. We know that electric light can do that. Air pollution and stress in cities are now clearly linked with higher levels of cancers, and microwave oven, the radiation emanating from that. Dehydration is a very, very common cause of cancer, but very, very few doctors are pointing out these various reasons. One of them is such an easy thing. It's sunlight deficiency. We are being brainwashed that sunlight is a dangerous thing, whereas there are nearly a dozen studies to show, and they are very, very clear on that sunlight actually prevents cancer and can reverse up to 50 to 60% of all cancers, simply because sunlight induces vitamin D in the body. Vitamin D is absolutely essential for keeping a healthy immune system going, and 80% of the American population is vitamin D deficient, so 1 out of every 2 people will develop cancer in this country, and at some stage in their lives. And one of the reasons is because people no longer get in the sun without sunscreens or sunglasses. We now know that sunglasses induce cancer. Wearing sunglasses is a very simple thing, because it impairs the ability of the body to produce certain chemicals in the brain, and they are called melanocytes, and these are responsible for inducing the production of melanin, which is protecting the skin against the radiation from the sun, the ultraviolet radiation. So again, once you wear sunglasses, the body doesn't know that it is light outside. It's perceiving as if it's getting dark or it's getting evening, and therefore the production of these hormones decrease, and at the same time serotonin production decreases, which is also a risk factor for increasing cancer. Serotonin is a very powerful brain hormone, and it's induced by sunlight. The more sunlight you have, the more serotonin you make. The less sunlight you're exposed to, the less you make. And so it's a very, very crucial factor for keeping the body healthy. So there are very simple things. We now even know Johns Hopkins University keeps talking about it. Exercise reduces cancer dramatically, or the risk of cancer, and even if you have cancer, it can reverse it by up to 45%. So these are little things everyone should know about, but we are not taught. The mass media doesn't speak about it, and certainly the pharmaceutical industry is not interested in promoting anything that remotely could help people recover from cancer, or in fact cure it, which the name cure is not even used, but it's very clear that cancer shouldn't be a terminal illness whatsoever, because when you point out what causes cancer, it's not a difficult disease to clear up.
And clearly, listening to you, I should have warned everybody. They should have had a piece of paper and a pen to write down all the things that you just went off. And clearly that answers it in my mind as I'm listening to you. And I asked you the question before, why is this not being taught? I'm just listening to a whole bunch of reasons. Perhaps some of it is the pharmaceutical industry certainly has no vested interest in educating the population this way. They want to sell drugs. But a lot of physicians across this country, I think if they're listening to this interview, they're not trained in this field at all, in this kind of study at all. I would encourage everybody out there listening to this interview to do your own research. Look into all of this. I'd like to talk a little bit about a few of these things, look a little deeper, if you will, into some of these things. You'd mentioned something about oxygen. What is the relationship between a lack of oxygen and a development of a cancer tumor?
Well, every cell in the body requires oxygen. Our cells are aerobic cells, so in order to metabolize food, in order to produce energy, it requires oxygen and glucose. And the end byproduct would be ATP molecules, which are used to basically control metabolic functions, so that your body can be healthy and live. And so you need a healthy metabolism to perform all the different functions that the body has to come up with. The liver alone has 500 different performances to do, 500 different functions, including the detoxification of the blood, removal of noxious substances. If a person takes medical drugs, the liver is there to break it down. The liver breaks down hormones, estrogens, and many other hormones that need to be on a certain level. If they increase too much or decrease too much, then you develop symptoms of illness. So and then the liver makes bile, 1.5 quarts of bile per day, which regulates the digestive functions. Without the bile, the digestive system is not going to work very well. Then you have a lot of undigested food lying in the small and large intestine. Then you have to engage bacteria to help break down these foods, decompose them, and that produces toxins, and these toxins get absorbed and taken up by the lymphatic system, which then gets congested, and gradually the body is suffocating in the waste that the lymphatic system can no longer remove.
So literally, excuse me for interrupting, literally the cells cannot breathe.
And then the cells cannot breathe. And then what happens is they don't get enough oxygen. When they cannot rely on oxygen to convert glucose into the appropriate amount of energies, then they need to have other things. So they have to genetically get reprogrammed, and not by choice, but by force, by an external change of the environment.
By necessity to survive.
Yeah, so basically when there's so much waste that is stuck there in the tissue fluids, that means the fluid that surrounds the cells, then the cells have to genetically get reprogrammed.
Mutate.
Called genetic mutation. And that allows them then to live anaerobically without oxygen. But their metabolism is a little different than in a normal healthy cell. A cancer cell requires about 15 times the amount of sugar or glucose in order to create the same amount of energy that a healthy cell would create when it breathes oxygen. So without
much less efficient.
The cell becomes very, very inefficient, and therefore it eats more sugar. It needs more sugar, and that's the only reason why cancer can be such a debilitating illness. Because the cancer cell will use up all the glucose as much as it can get, because its appetite for sugar is so high that the other cells that are surrounding the area of the tumor, for example, they don't get enough glucose anymore, and so they get tired, weak, and damaged. And that if they don't genetically mutate into cancer cells as well, and it's not because they get infected by cancer cells. There is no such a thing that one cancer cell infects another cell. There are no infectious agents. There is no virus or bacteria involved in that. There are cancer cells occurring in other places that are also deprived of the oxygen and the amount of glucose. So once that happens, you will have a weakening of the organ structure and eventually the demise of the organ if you don't remove the root cause of the problem, which is the congestion and the poor digestion, the poor elimination of waste from the body, which then becomes a cesspool.
So just it leads us to another discussion or part of cancer. As an exercise scientist, I know that you've mentioned how aerobic exercise, or exercise in general, is very helpful, but of course people listening out there have varying degrees of energy, and their health condition varies as well. If someone is very weakened by cancer, certainly going out for a 60-minute walk might be an issue. So how does this role, as you say, of a lack of oxygen, therefore a cancer cell lives more in a sugar environment, what kind of role does nutrition play in preventing cancer? What are some of the briefly, what are some of the key things we should be careful of? Obviously, it seems clear somebody with cancer should not be eating spoons of sugar.
That's correct. That's one point. And so a lot of the fast food that we are consuming on a massive scale in this country, and the junk food that basically doesn't have any nutritional value, except even cardboard has more nutrients in them than some of these foods. So when you eat a lot of these non-physiological foods that the body doesn't use in any way, they are remaining undigested, and then they become subject to fermentation or putrefaction. And when they are putrefied or decomposed, then the bacteria that do the work of decomposing them, they produce poisons, and these poisons can be extremely toxic. For example, if you eat red meat, the average person can only digest up to 20% of that meat because the concentration of hydrochloric acid is very, very small compared to a carnivorous animal. So if we eat a piece of steak and we only digest 20% of it, we have to decompose the rest of the 80%. And that means a huge amount of what are known as carcinogenic amines, the AMINES, or cadaverins, or putrescins. These are carcinogenic compounds which, when they enter the lymphatic system, which they do, the lymphatic system that is attached to the small and large intestine. So when the lymphatic system takes up these poisons, they are surrounded by fluids, and that can cause lymphedema or lymph congestion. And once you block up the lymph system in that part of the body, which is in the the abdominal region, then there will be backwashing of waste products from other parts of the body that are trying to get rid of their metabolic waste like lactic acid, uric acid, ammonia, and urea. These are very acidic compounds and very caustic compounds, and if they are not removed from any given area, there's an acid buildup, and it's called acidosis. And this acidosis, if it reaches a point of total suffocation in an area, or lack of oxygenation because of that, then cancer is a very, very likely survival mechanism in order to deal with this situation.
Let's talk a little bit about something that I know is very common. A lot of people with cancer, they think it's, well, they have the gene for cancer, which you've clearly outlined. This is not so much the case as what I'm getting from you, but let's talk about this a little bit. Are there genes for cancer? Are we born with cancer genes?
Well, we can have a genetic predisposition now. Like many people get born with certain weaknesses, and they have certain strengths. My mother was born with hepatitis. I was born with, basically with a weak liver because my mother had hepatitis 3 times in her life. So I didn't have a good start with that, and I produced intrahepatic gallstones, as Johns Hopkins University calls them. Eventually I had 3,500 stones in my liver.
Wow.
Not uncommon. That's actually extremely common. And every person who has some kind of illness or arthritic condition or pain or digestive problems or chronic headaches or skin problems, virtually any kind of illness, has these intrahepatic gallstones in the bile ducts of their liver, which prevents the proper secretion of bile. And then the lack of bile causes a lot of gastrointestinal distress. Now, when you get that kind of genetic, it's not a genetic programming. It's just that your organs cannot develop properly if the mother's organs are not developed properly or not functioning properly at the time you grow in her womb.
Right.
Now, when you come out, it doesn't mean that you're going to develop the same kind of problem. When I cleared up my entire liver of all those stones, and I did the liver flushes, I have written a book, The Amazing Liver and Gallbladder Flush, and cleaned it all out, all my health problems completely disappeared. And any kind of arthritic and pain condition that I had, that was gone. I had 40 gallstone attacks before I did my first liver flush, and I never had one again. And so, literally, when the body is allowed to clean out what has been building up for a long time, then your organ can go back to its original design, which would be the original genetic blueprint that you're equipped with. There are very few genetic diseases, about 1%, and these are not the ones we're talking about when people say, I have a gene for diabetes or a gene for cancer or
Sure.
for arthritis. My parents had it. What we inherit usually is the lifestyle and the eating habits, the diet, the same kind of diet that we just basically copied from our parents. We looked at them, they gave us to certain food, we got used to it, and we maintained that kind of diet for many years, and we developed the same kind of problem as they did. So that has nothing to do with genes. The genes themselves are not responsible. You can take the nucleus out of a cell and put it in a test tube, and it will continue doing all its jobs for the lifespan that is allocated for it, let's say 6 weeks. Many cells in the body live 6 weeks, then they die, they get replaced with new cells. If you take the nucleus out of one cell, put it in a test tube, it will continue behaving completely normally. So it has nothing to do with the gene. The genes don't do anything in the body. They are the blueprint. The environment changes the behavior of the gene. So if you eat a lot of junk food and the body doesn't have any other place to put that stuff and the body becomes acidified, then it doesn't have any other choice but to change the genetic program in order to survive in that environment. And this has nothing to do with disease. There are no diseases that are gene-induced. If you have a person, if you have 100 people, and 50 of them have a gene for breast cancer, for a certain kind of breast cancer, and the other 50 don't have it. Well, out of those 50, 25 of them will develop that particular cancer, and 25 will not. And in the other group of the other 50, there may be a similar average. So it has nothing really to do with the gene, whether you are going to develop a certain kind of illness. It has all to do with what you eat, how you live, when you sleep, what time you eat your main meal of the day. These are factors that greatly influence the way how your body digests food, eliminates waste, and detoxifies itself. And if these natural routines basically are disturbed, then you create a massive distress or distortion of the hormonal balance in the body. Once you change the hormones, then cancer is really something that can develop quite easily. And we have seen that. Estrogens abound, increase, and then you have the estrogen-related breast cancers. Same thing with men. If testosterone goes up, you can have one illness. If you have another hormone going up, if you have certain hormones going down, like serotonin, dopamine, and others, or brain hormones like interleukins, interferons that are produced by the DNA of the cells, then you suddenly have or adrenaline, noradrenaline. We know the stress response. So a person who gets really frightened or anxious or is constantly worried about things, you shed out a massive amount of stress hormones, which greatly increase the risk of cancer.
Well, Andreas, right. That's what I want to get into to end our interview. But just first, let me say, you have fantastic clarity about this issue, and I think you've made it very clear to everyone. If anyone out there is wondering about this, I think what I keep thinking about when I listen to you is that it's very clear. A predisposition does not constitute predetermined.
Correct.
We are not doomed to get something.
Right.
It's very important for us to understand our past, where we've come from, what is happening to us, and empower ourselves with things that we can do. Before we end this interview, I would like to talk just a little bit for a few minutes about what you feel the importance of thoughts and feelings are in the healing process.
Extremely important. Every thought and feeling and emotion that you have gets translated into powerful hormones in the brain. They're called neurotransmitters. They are peptides. That means 100% protein. They get secreted in response to everything that goes on in your mind, in your emotions, feelings. So every cell in the body is connected with that. We have receptors for those neuropeptides in our body. So every cell in the body gets informed of what you have been thinking. So you're literally talking to your cells. There's Russian research that clearly shows that you're talking to your DNA. You're reprogramming your DNA with every word you utter or the thought that you have in your head. So you're literally changing the behavior of the body. If someone comes along and tells you you have cancer and it's a difficult thing and it's very difficult to heal it, then you may interpret that as a death sentence. You translate those thoughts into stress hormones, which will put you into a position where healing is almost absent. It basically contracts. There is actually research to show that the DNA strands start collapsing into themselves. They contract when you have stressful responses. Every thought that you have that you're not good enough, that you're a victim of something, that a disease is striking you as if it has an intention, a bad intention on you. That there are enemies out there that are trying to kill you. That sort of feeling of I need to protect myself. In that protection mode, you have no ability to produce interleukins, interleukin 2, which is an anti-cancer drug that every cell in the body makes, and it goes right down, and so it leaves you unprotected. Then the body uses then the cancer cells to deal with the toxins that are created and that are not removed by the body under the stress response. When you're stressed or worried, then you're contracting all the blood vessels in the inside of your organs, and you increase the blood flow in the periphery, like in the muscles and in the bones, so that you could run away. That's the typical fight or flight response. And so many people in this country are under chronic stress. That means they are perceiving the outside world as a threat to them. And that's a misinterpretation, because it's not really so. But it's interpreted that way. And the effect is that it's translating into those very powerful biochemical changes. So the importance is to take care of the basics in life. If a person goes to bed late in the evening, we now know that this is a huge stress inducer. The immune system plummets. The melatonin levels go down. Melatonin is about the best safeguard against cancer. The more melatonin you make, the better it is. Melatonin gets only secreted in response to darkness. So when it's dark outside and you don't have the light and you go to bed before 10 and you basically have no light source around you, then your body makes so much melatonin that reduces the risk of cancer, developing cancer enormously. People like nurses, they have an irregular sleeping habit. They have 55% higher risk of cancer than the average person has. So very simple things that you can do in order to reduce the stress load and the ability to deal with it. Eating the main meal at lunchtime will make a huge difference, because that's the time your serotonin is reaching its peak level in response to sunlight. So you have the ability to digest your food much more effectively. In fact, you can digest up to 90% of a big meal. If you eat the same meal in the evening, you will only digest 10-15% of that meal, and you have a huge amount of undigested food that is sitting in your intestine during the nighttime. It's rotting away, it's getting decomposed, the body produces poisons from that, and then puts that into the circulation, lymphatic system, and even into the blood. And so this has a lot of consequences on how you deal with any situation, stressful situation in your life. If your body is stressed in itself, you will feel stressed, giving the challenges that are happening in your outside environment, and suddenly you can no longer be calm and responsive in a natural way. You will be reactive, and you will create all the stress hormones. It doesn't make you feel good.
You've made it very clear, Andreas. It seems really clear and simple that someone should be doing everything they can to create the kind of environment that they want and create this greater sense in their thoughts and feelings, a will to live, if you will.
Yes.
A will to live. If someone wanted more information, Andreas, on everything that you do, perhaps help, where can they go?
They can go to my website, and that's the best source. There are many books I've written, and there's a lot of information as well on the health section, where you can read up on a lot of the specific information, how the liver, for example, is such a central organ determining the health of the rest of the body. And also there are some books who are spiritual books that I've written for those who want to deal with the other part of life, because we are not just physical beings.
And the website again, Andreas?
It's called Ener-Chi.com. That's www.ener-chi.com. Ener-Chi.com. ener-chi.com.
That's great. Andreas, I want to thank you for being our guest.